The Xylarian exploration ship drifted at the far edge of known space, its silver hull catching faint glimmers from distant stars. The crew had been traveling for months, mapping sectors no one had touched before. They expected empty voids, perhaps a few barren rocks, and the occasional frozen moon. But then the strange signal appeared on their long-range scanners. It was weak, hidden under waves of static, and yet it pulsed with an odd rhythm, like a heartbeat echoing in space. Captain Dreth leaned forward in his command chair, his dark eyes locked on the data screens. "Is that artificial?" he asked quietly. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. The signal didn't match any known communication codes from modern civilizations. It was old, impossibly old, the kind of thing that shouldn't exist anymore. The science officer ran a quick analysis and confirmed if this was a broadcast made with primitive human technology, the sort that had vanished from the galaxy centuries ago. The discovery sent a low murmur through the bridge. The Xylarians had records of human history. They knew humans were spread across many colonies. They knew humans were capable warriors and clever engineers. But this was something different. It suggested there was a place no one had visited. In generations, a human world lost to time, they set a course toward the source. As the ship approached, the stars faded behind a curtain of electromagnetic storms. Waves of green and violet energy rippled across space like ghostly curtains. The storm battered their shields, making the control panels flicker. Captain Dreth's voice stayed calm as he ordered the crew to push through. The planet below came into view at last, its surface hidden under thick clouds that glowed faintly. From lightning strikes, long-range scans pierced the cloud cover for brief moments. What they saw made the crew fall silent. Massive cities lay in ruin across the continents. Skyscrapers lay broken like snapped bones. Domes lay cracked and overgrown. With strange red plants, it was not just a dead planet. It was once alive, once human. The architecture was unmistakable. Angular, yet graceful, built for a species that thrived in extremes. Dreth felt a strange pull in his chest. It was not curiosity alone. It was the weight of finding something that had been erased from history. "Prepare a landing party," he ordered. His voice carried both authority and a quiet wonder. The shuttle cut through the storm like a dart of light, shaking under the force of the winds. When they broke through the clouds, the sight took their breath away. Endless stretches of cracked pavement led into towering ruins. Windows were blown out. Streets were buried under decades of dust and vines. Huge statues of human figures stood toppled in public squares, their stone faces worn but still proud. The Xylarian crew stepped out onto the soil, their boots crunching over debris. The air was thin but breathable, carrying a faint metallic temps. A warm wind moved through the ruins, making an eerie whistling sound as it slipped through shattered windows and hollow towers. Lieutenant Kale held a motion tracker in his clawed hands. The device showed no life signs, and yet, every now and then, he thought he heard something soft, like a whisper curling just behind his head. They walked slowly, scanning every building they passed. The silence was heavy, the kind that made each footstep sound too loud. It was not the peaceful silence of a dead world, it was the expectant silence of a place holding its breath. The crew could feel it, though none spoke of it. Dreth kept his focus on the path ahead, noting the strange scorch marks on walls. As if weapons had been fired here long ago, a collapsed bridge blocked their way, forcing them to move through what had once been a marketplace. Broken stalls leaned against each other, their fabric covers rotted away. Rusted tools lay scattered. On the ground, covered in red dust, it looked as if people had left in a hurry, leaving their possessions behind. Lieutenant Kale bent down to pick up a small metal toy shaped like a warship. It was dented but intact. He turned it over in his hand, imagining the human child who once played with it. Then he quietly set it back on the ground. The deeper they went, The more the ruins seemed to close in around them. Shadows stretched long. Between crumbling buildings, the strange whispers on the wind grew stronger, as if the planet itself was speaking in a forgotten language. Dreth ordered his team to stay alert. The scanner still showed nothing living nearby. But Kale's grip tightened on his weapon. Instinct was telling him they were not truly alone. As they reached the heart of the city, a massive structure rose. Before them, taller than anything else around, its walls were scorched black in places, but the main frame stood strong. A faded emblem was carved above the entrance's symbol no one in the crew recognized, yet they could all feel its weight. It looked military, but old, far older than any current Earth fleet insignia. Dreth felt a ripple of unease. The crew stood at the base of the structure, gazing up at its towering doors. The air here felt heavier, charged with something unseen. The signal that had brought them here was strongest in this place. They could almost feel it humming beneath their feet. Kale glanced at the captain. "This is it," he said quietly. Dreth nodded, though his jaw tightened. Something about this planet's silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like waiting. And whatever it was waiting for, they might have just arrived to wake it up. The shuttle touched down in a small clearing between the shattered buildings, its landing struts sinking slightly into soil that had long since been overtaken by red moss and thorny vines. The Xylarian landing party stepped out one by one, their boots crunching over brittle debris. A faint mist clung to the ground, curling around their legs as they moved forward. The sky above was a swirling mass of gray clouds, flashes of lightning. Flickering deep within them, the ruins rose up on all sides, their jagged shapes cutting into the horizon like broken teeth. Some towers leaned at impossible angles, their glass long gone. Others had collapsed entirely, leaving heaps of twisted steel and stone. The silence pressed against the crew like an invisible weight. Every sound they made a footstep. A clink of gear seemed to echo for too long before fading away. Lieutenant Kale led the way, his motion tracker in hand. The small device beeped steadily, showing nothing alive within range, yet his eyes kept darting to the shadows between the ruins. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. There was a strange texture to the air here, as if it was carrying something unseen. They followed a cracked road toward the heart of the city, stepping over fallen street lamps and shattered signs covered in strange human lettering. None of the Xylarians could read it, but the symbols felt old. Older than most civilizations still breathing in the galaxy. Commander Syra trailed her fingers along a wall as she walked, brushing away a layer of dust to reveal faded colors murals of human figures in heavy armor. Standing in formation beside vast warships, their faces were determined, their eyes locked on something unseen. Looks like a military world, Syra muttered. Captain Dreth gave a slow nod but said nothing. He was scanning the buildings around them, noting how some bore the scars of weapons fire. High-energy blasts had scorched walls, leaving black streaks that stretched toward the sky. Others had been torn open as if by massive claws or machinery. Whatever had happened here, it had not been a peaceful end. The road eventually split, one path leading deeper into the city, the other curving toward a cluster of smaller, domed structures. Dreth pointed toward the domes. "We'll start there. Smaller buildings might give us a clearer picture," he said. The crew moved in silence, weapons at the ready, though there was still no sign of movement. The first dome they entered was partially collapsed. Its roof had caved in, letting in shafts of pale light. Inside, the air was cooler and still carried the faint smell of metal. Rows of long tables stretched across the floor, covered in what looked like old control consoles. Their screens were dark, their surfaces coated in layers of dust thick enough to leave marks when touched. Kale brushed one clean and frowned. There were deep claw-like scratches across the surface. Not the kind left by tools, Further in, they found a corridor leading down into the ground. The walls here were lined with more of that strange human writing, and along the way, they passed framed pictures that had somehow survived the years. In them, humans stood in groups, wearing uniforms with a symbol on their shoulders. Smiling as if frozen in time, Syra stopped to look closer, her eyes narrowing. They look like soldiers, but not just soldiers. "These are warship crews," she said quietly. The corridor ended at a heavy steel door, partially open. The edges were bent inward, as if something had forced its way in. Beyond it lay a vast chamber lit only by the team's shoulder lamps. The light swept across cracked floors and strange machinery, until it caught on a large metal plate in the center of the room. The plate bore the same faded emblem they'd seen outside, a crest that seemed to hum faintly in the silence. Kale crouched near the plate, running a scanner over it. The reading spiked, picking up a faint but steady power source beneath their feet. "There's still energy down there," he said, his voice low. Dreth stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. As he looked at the emblem, something about it felt heavy, almost alive, as if it carried the memory of whatever had been here before. Before they could investigate further, a sudden gust of wind howled through the open doorway, swirling dust into the chamber. It carried with it a sound, a low, drawn-out whisper that none of them could understand. The crew froze, weapons coming. Up instinctively, Kale's scanner flickered with static before clearing again. Still showing nothing, Dreth straightened slowly, his gaze fixed on the emblem. "Whatever's down there." "It's not dead," he said quietly, and though no one spoke it aloud, they all felt the same thing, that they had just stepped onto ground that had been waiting for centuries for someone to return. The air inside the great chamber was thick and unmoving. Each breath felt heavy, carrying the faint tang of metal and something older, something that had lingered for centuries. The Xylarian crew spread out carefully, their lights sweeping over broken machinery, fallen beams, and shattered panels. Dust floated in the air like drifting ash, and every sound, the soft scrape of boots, the click of weapons, echoed off the high curved walls. Commander Syra moved toward the far side of the chamber, her lamp catching on a strange set of double doors built into the floor. They were seamless, except for a faint outline and a keypad so worn it looked like it had been pressed 1,000 times. She knelt, tracing her fingers over the surface. The metal was cold, colder than the rest of the room. "There's something below us," she said softly, her voice almost swallowed by the silence. Kale brought his scanner over, watching as the device's readings jumped wildly. There was definite power coming from beneath the floor, steady and deliberate, not the erratic surges of decayed tech. "It's not just active," he said, glancing toward Captain Dreth. "It's awake." Dreth's gaze swept the chamber again, noting the strange marks on the wall's deep grooves that looked as if something had been dragged across the metal. In the corners, under collapsed girders, he saw remnants of banners, their colors faded to gray, but their shapes still hinting at a human military crest. None of it matched any Earth fleet the Xylarian archives had on record. Syra began examining the keypad, her long fingers working carefully over the corroded buttons. A faint hum rose from beneath the floor, and suddenly, the double doors gave a soft mechanical click. A sliver of pale light shone from the crack as they began to slide open. The crew stepped back instinctively. Weapons raised, the sound of ancient gears grinding echoed through the room. The opening revealed a steep descent into darkness, lined with dim blue lights that flickered uncertainly. The air rising from below was colder still, carrying the scent of long-sealed chambers. Dreth gave a short nod. "We're going down," he said. The stairwell twisted deep beneath the surface, the walls narrowing slightly as if the space had been built for secrecy rather than comfort. Their lights revealed more human lettering etched into plaques along the walls. Some showed diagrams of starships with hull shapes the Xylarians had never seen before in Keeler. Predatory, built for war, Syra slowed at one, running her hand over the smooth engraving. These designs. They're older than any in the records, and meaner, she murmured, at the bottom. They stepped into a long corridor lined with heavy glass panels. Behind each one stood a large pod, their surfaces covered in frost. The shapes inside were unmistakably human, tall, broad-shouldered figures wearing uniforms that had somehow resisted the passage of time. The pods glowed faintly from within, small readouts still showing life signs. Kale's voice was barely a whisper. Cryogenic suspension. For centuries, he walked along the row, counting dozens of pods, each one holding a silent guardian of the past. The uniforms bore the same faded emblem they had seen above. A symbol of a fleet erased from history. Syra pressed her hand against the glass of one pod. Peering in at the man inside, his hair was dark. His jaw set, as though even in sleep he refused to yield. "They're soldiers," she said. "But not just soldiers. Look at the rank insignias. These are officers." Dreth's mind raced. Cryostorage. Of this scale was rare and almost always tied to war. If these humans had been preserved instead of buried, there was a reason, and it was not peace. He stepped closer to a central console. Its screen cracked, but still glowing faintly. Lines of ancient human code scrolled across it, symbols the ship's translation systems could barely interpret. Words flickered into Xylarian script at last status. Stand by, awaiting signal, before. Dreth could speak. The console emitted a sharp tone. The lights in the corridor brightened slightly, and a deep mechanical hum filled the air. One of the pods gave a sudden hiss, a white cloud spilling from its edges. The frost began to melt. From the glass, revealing more clearly the man inside, Kale tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes flicking to Dreth for orders, but the captain held up a hand, watching as the pod systems moved on their own. Whatever had triggered this awakening wasn't coming from the Xylarians, it was from within. The man's chest rose slowly. His eyes still closed. Then a sharp exhale fogged the glass before it slid open with a low hiss. The figure stepped out, tall and steady, despite the centuries and sleep. His uniform was worn, but intact, the faded emblem catching the light. His eyes opened clear, cold blue that locked instantly on Dreth. He didn't speak at first, simply looking at each alien in turn. There was no fear, only measured assessment. Finally, his voice came, deep and steady, in perfect English. "Who woke me?" The words carried not confusion but authority. Kale and Syra exchanged glances. Unsure how to answer, Dreth stepped forward slightly. "We found this place." "We found you," he said. The man's expression didn't change, but his gaze sharpened. "Then tell me," he said slowly, "how long have we been waiting?" The man stood barefoot on the cold metal floor, steam still curling from his skin where the cryo-mist clung. His breathing was steady, but his eyes never stopped moving, studying every alien face, every weapon, every small motion of the Xylarian. "Crew," the air felt tighter now, as if the entire underground facility was holding its breath. Captain Dreth took a slow step forward, keeping his posture calm. "You've been asleep for a long time," he said. The man tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "How long?" he asked again, his voice low but carrying a sharp edge. Syra glanced at Kale, who tapped quickly on his wrist console, checking the time records. "Approximately 312 years since this facility was last active," Kale replied. The man's jaw tightened, his gaze lowering briefly to the floor before meeting theirs again. There was no shock in his eyes, only a quiet, dangerous focus. "My name is Nathan Cole," he said after a pause, "captain of the Earth's warship Sentinel." The words hung in the cold air. None of the Xylarian crew had ever heard of such a ship. Dreth's mind raced. There was no record of it in the archives. Nothing even close. If it had been real, history had erased it completely. Nathan's gaze shifted toward the rows of pods still standing silent in the corridor. "The others, my crew, are they intact?" he asked. Kale nodded. "Life signs are stable." Nathan gave a slow, single nod in return, almost to himself. As if confirming a plan that had been buried alongside him, Syra took a cautious step closer. "Why were you here? Why hide beneath this world?" she asked. Nathan's eyes flickered toward her, and for the first time, there was something just a shadow behind his calm expression. "We weren't hiding," he said quietly. "We were waiting." The words unsettled the crew. Dreth could feel it in the slight shift of their stances. "Waiting for what?" Dreth asked. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped past them, his bare feet silent on the frost-slick floor, moving toward the central console. His hands hovered above it for a moment before he began inputting commands with precise movements. The console lights brightened, and the room's hum grew louder. The remaining pods flickered with pale blue light as though sensing their captain's presence. Nathan didn't look up as he spoke. "We fought something once. Something older than your oldest ruins, older than your councils and your fleets." His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made every word feel heavier. Syra's brow furrowed. "An enemy." Nathan gave a faint, humorless smile, if you want to call it that. He tapped another sequence into the console, and a section of the wall hissed open to reveal an old-style display screen. Static filled the image before clearing into a grainy recording vast, twisting shapes moving against a backdrop of stars, their surfaces alive with shifting liquid shadows. The Xylarian crew leaned in, their eyes narrowing. The things on the screen did not look like ships or even living beings. They looked like space itself, folding and unfolding, tearing light apart wherever they moved. Nathan's voice cut through the room. "We called them the Hollow." The recording shifted, showing flashes of a massive battleships shaped like jagged blades, firing streams of light into the darkness. Colossal explosions blooming and dying in silence. One by one, the human vessels fell, their hulls torn apart as if by invisible claws. Nathan's own voice echoed faintly from the recording, shouting orders over the chaos. He shut the display off, the sudden darkness making the faint blue lights of the pods seem sharper. "We knew we couldn't win, not then," he continued, "so we made a choice." The Sentinel and her crew went into cryosleep, deep under a fortified world, waiting for a day when the Hollow might return, when we could finish what we started. Kale glanced at Dreth, his voice low. "Captain, our records don't show any sign of the Hollow for centuries." Nathan finally looked directly at him. And in that instant, Kale understood there was no relief in Nathan's expression. "Only grim certainty. They will come back," Nathan said. "And if you're finding me now, it means they already have." For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavier, the low hum of the facility vibrating in their chests. Dreth took a slow breath, his mind turning rapidly. If this man spoke the truth, the thing they had just uncovered was not just a relic of human history, was a weapon. One the galaxy might desperately need, or one that could doom them all if used too late. Nathan turned away from the console, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Wake my crew," he ordered. "We don't have time to waste." The hiss of the cryopods echoed through the underground corridor like the sound of slow, steady breathing. Frost cracked and fell in thin sheets as the glass began to clear, revealing the faces of men and women who had not aged a day in 3 centuries. Their eyes were still closed, their bodies still, but faint streams of vapor drifted from their mouths, proof that life had returned to them. Nathan stood in the center of it all, bare feet planted firmly on the cold floor, his hands clasped behind his back, watching each pod with the focus of a man counting his most precious possessions. One by one, his crew stepped into the present. their uniforms crisp despite the centuries. Their boots hitting the metal floor in unison. They looked to him immediately, not needing to ask where they were or what had happened, only waiting for orders. The Xylarian crew could only watch in silence. The discipline was unlike anything they had seen. These humans didn't ask questions, didn't show fear. It was as if they had gone to sleep expecting to wake in a war and were ready to walk straight back into it. Dreth stepped closer to Nathan, his voice low. "You've been gone over 300 years, whatever enemy you were fighting. It's not in the records anymore." Nathan turned his head slowly, meeting Dreth's eyes. "Then your records are wrong," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an iron certainty behind it. The hollow doesn't disappear. They wait. And when they return, it's never small, never quiet. Syra shifted uneasily. If they were coming back, we'd know, she said. Nathan didn't even look at her. "You wouldn't," he replied. "Not until it was too late." Kale frowned, his eyes flicking between the awakened humans. Why not warn the galaxy back then? Why go into hiding? Nathan's gaze turned cold. "We weren't hiding," he said, his tone clipped. "We were waiting for the moment when our ship could strike and end them for good. Anything less would have been suicide." One of his officers, a woman with short dark hair and sharp eyes, approached and handed Nathan a small, metallic device she'd recovered from a storage compartment. Nathan pressed it against his wrist, and faint lines of light spread under his skin, syncing his biosignature to something unseen. The hum of the facility deepened, and far above, the Xylarian ship's sensors suddenly lit up, detecting a massive power surge in orbit. Dreth's comms officer's voice came through the captain's earpiece. "Tense, sir. There's something coming out of the planet's shadow." They all felt it before they saw it, a low, resonating vibration in the air. As though the planet itself was exhaling, the underground walls trembled, faint dust raining down. Nathan's lips curved into the smallest trace of a smile. "The Sentinel is waking," he said quietly above the clouds. The Xylarian crew aboard their ship saw it emerge, a shape of impossible scale sliding from the darkness, its black armor absorbing the starlight. At first, it seemed like a shadow detached from the planet itself. Then the details became clear: resourced hull plates, gun batteries the size of city towers, engines that glowed with a deep crimson light. It dwarfed the Xylarian vessel, not just in size, but in presence. Inside the warship, lights blazed to life along the corridors. Control stations powered on, and deep within its core, reactors hummed with a strength no modern ship could match. The Sentinel had not merely been preserved, had been waiting in perfect readiness. Nathan stepped past Dreth toward the stairwell. His officers falling into step around him. "We're going to orbit," he said. "You'll want to see this from the bridge." When they emerged into the storm-racked sky aboard the Xylarian shuttle, the sight above stole the breath from even the most hardened explorers. The Sentinel hung in the void like a predator watching its prey, weapons slowly tracking as though searching for a target that only Nathan could see. Syra stared at it, her voice barely audible. "That's human." Nathan's eyes never left his ship. "Human," he said simply, "and built for one purpose." Dreth didn't have to ask what that purpose was. He could feel it in the way the warship seemed to radiate intent, like it was already choosing which stars would burn first. And somewhere in the cold between worlds, something else might have felt it too. Nathan finally turned, meeting Dreth's gaze. "If the Hollow are in this galaxy, they'll know we're awake now," he said. "The only question is whether we find them before they find us." The Sentinel moved through the black, like a living shadow, its vast hull swallowing the starlight from the Xylarian bridge. The warship looked less like something built and more like something born from the void itself. Its engines glowed with a deep, steady crimson, every pulse of light pushing it forward with silent authority. Nathan stood at the center of his ship's command deck, the air around him humming with the thrum of ancient machinery, waking to full power. His crew moved at their stations with precise, almost rehearsed motions, their fingers sweeping across controls that responded instantly despite centuries of disuse. No one wasted a movement. No one asked unnecessary questions they didn't need to. This was the moment they had been sleeping for. Captain Dreth watched from a secondary station, still trying to understand how a vessel this old could outclass every modern warship he'd seen. Its structure was angular, but layered in ways that suggested armor on top of armor. Each weapon battery had an independent targeting system, and every targeting system was already live, tracking empty space as though expecting an enemy to emerge at any moment. A low chime echoed through the Sentinel's bridge, and one of Nathan's officers, a tall man with silver-streaked hair, looked up from his console. "Long-range sweep complete, Captain," he said. "We've got anomalies." Nathan's expression sharpened. "Define anomalies." The officer tapped a sequence, and the main view screen flared to life. At first, the stars looked untouched. Then, faint distortions began to ripple across the image, small bends in the light, places where space itself seemed to twist unnaturally. Nathan's voice was calm, but his eyes were locked on the screen. "The hollow," he said. Dreth's stomach tightened. He remembered the distorted shapes from the old recording. But this was worse. The sensors showed dozens of them, moving in coordinated arcs toward the system. Each one was enormous, but their forms were not solid. They shifted constantly, their surfaces alive with writhing shadows. Syra leaned closer to her display. "They're bending sensor readings," she muttered. "Half of them might be closer than they appear." Nathan didn't glance at her. "They are," he said simply. "It's one of their tricks. If you trust your instruments more than your eyes, you're already dead." An alert rang out, a rising tone that made even the Xylarian crew tense. The hollow had altered course. They were heading straight for the planet. Nathan's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Helm, bring us ahead of their approach vector. Weapons stand by all batteries." The Sentinel shifted, engines burning hotter. The view on the screen tilted as the massive ship swung into a forward position, placing itself directly between the hollow and the planet's surface. Its weapon arrays extended like the wings of a hunting bird, plating sliding back to reveal rows of rail cannons, missile pods, and energy lances that gleamed faintly in the dark. Kale stepped forward, gripping the railing. "If they're as bad as you say, can you win?" Nathan didn't look away from the screen. "We don't run," he said simply. "We break them." The first hollow came into clear view, a massive twisting black that seemed to swallow the stars behind it, its surface pulsing with faint red veins. It didn't move like a ship. It drifted and then snapped forward with sudden speed, space warping around it. The Sentinel's targeting arrays locked in with rapid precision. "Open fire," Nathan ordered. The warship roared to life. Rail cannons fired in a rolling wave, streaks of blazing metal cutting across the void. Energy lances cracked outward in blinding flashes, and missiles screamed silently toward their targets. The first volley tore through the leading hollow, shadowy form shuddering as pieces of it dissolved into nothingness. But instead of dying, it split into two smaller masses that swerved to attack from different angles. Nathan's crew didn't flinch. Adjustments were instant. New firing solutions locking in before the enemy could close. The bridge trembled as the Sentinel's main spinal gun fired a deep, resonating sound that vibrated in their bones. The beam cut a swath through three hollow forms, leaving a trail of empty, silent space behind. Dreth stared at the devastation, equal parts awe and dread in his voice. "This ship, it's not just powerful. He stopped himself, unable to find the right word. Nathan glanced his way, the faintest trace of a grim smile touching his lips. "It's human," he said. And this is what we were made for. More hollow emerged from the distortion fields. Dozens now, their approach relentless. The Sentinel banked hard, its weapons cycling without pause. Nathan's voice carried across the bridge, calm but unyielding. They wanted a fight. He said, "Let's remind them why they left the last time." The hollow came in waves, now blotting out the starlight as their shifting forms surged toward the planet. Their movement was unnatural smooth, 1 second, jagged and snapping the next, as if they were flickering between moments in time. The void around them rippled like water disturbed by unseen hands. And every ripple pulled them closer on the bridge of the Sentinel. The crew moved with machine-like precision. Every station hummed with power. Every screen flooded with targeting data. Nathan stood in the center like the still point of a storm, his eyes tracking the enemy formations without ever glancing at the chaos of alarms. "Forward batteries concentrate, fire on the leading cluster," he ordered. "Secondary teams screen the flanks." The warship answered with fury. Rail cannons fired in a steady rhythm, each shot ripping through hollow mass. Energy lances tore across the void in wide arcs, burning holes in shadow that took precious seconds to heal. But the hollow didn't fall back, they adapted. Their forms stretched into needle-like shapes and darted forward with impossible speed. Some split apart entirely, scattering into swarms of smaller fragments that darted between incoming fire. On the Xylarian vessel, tethered to the Sentinel's flank, Captain Dreth gripped the railing. Watching the impossible battle unfold, every hollow destroyed seemed to birth to more. The Sentinel fought like nothing he'd ever seen, but even he could feel the weight of the numbers closing in. One of Nathan's officers shouted from the weapons pit, "Starboard shields at 30%. Nathan didn't hesitate. Rotate power from the ventral grid. Shift rail cannon for 2 Filato. His orders came sharp and fast. No wasted words. The crew obeyed instantly. A deep shudder rolled through the deck as something massive struck the Sentinel's hull. The lights flickered for half a second before stabilizing. Damage reports scrolled across the side displays. "They're trying to breach us," Syra said from her station, her voice tight. "They won't," Nathan replied. His hand moved to a control embedded in the captain's chair, unlocking a sequence that had been sleeping for centuries. A low, ominous hum began to build from deep within the ship's core, growing louder until it vibrated in the bones of everyone aboard. Dreth glanced at Nathan. "What are you doing?" Nathan's eyes stayed on the view ahead. "Ending the opening round," he said. The main spinal gun began to charge, its energy buildup visible, even through the reinforced viewports. The weapon's core lit the bridge with a deep, blood-red glow. Outside, the hollow seemed to sense the threat, breaking formation to scatter and twist in chaotic patterns. "Fire," Nathan said. The shot tore through space like a spear of pure light. Cutting across the starfield in a single, unstoppable line, it passed cleanly through 4 hollow shapes, each one collapsing inward as if space itself had folded and swallowed them whole. The shockwave from the blast rippled outward, tearing apart dozens of smaller fragments in its wake. For a brief moment, the void was silent again. The remaining hollow pulled back, twisting and fading into the distortion fields from which they'd come. Their retreat wasn't chaotic, it was calculated. Nathan watched them go, his jaw set. "They'll regroup," he said, "and when they come back, it won't just be here." Syra looked up from her readings. "They're gone, for now." Nathan shook his head. "No, they're moving, finding the edges of our defenses. Testing the galaxy to see if it's still soft." He turned toward Dreth, his voice quiet but certain. "It won't be. Not while we're awake." The Sentinel's engines flared, turning the warship slowly toward the stars. The damaged teams reported in. The hum of the weapons began to fade, and for the first time since waking, Nathan allowed himself a slow breath. but his eyes never left the darkness ahead, as though he could already see the next battle forming just beyond sight. The battlefield was quiet now, but it was not the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the thin, fragile silence that lingers after a storm, when the air still smells of ozone and the ground still trembles from what has passed. The stars around the planet seemed calm again, yet every mind aboard the Sentinel knew that the Hollow had not been destroyed, only driven back. Nathan stood at the center of his bridge, hands resting lightly on the railing before him. Around him, his officers worked in smooth, purposeful motions, cataloging damage, rerouting power, and running post-battle scans. No one spoke more than necessary. And even in the absence of alarms, the air carried a tension that refused to ease. Captain Dreth and Commander Syra had been given a place on the forward observation deck. From here, they could see the warship's massive hull stretching away. In both directions, the black armor scarred in fresh streaks where hollow attacks had struck home. The damage was real, but minimal compared to what they'd just faced. Nathan turned toward them, his expression calm but unreadable. "You saw what we're up against," he said. His voice was not asking for agreement, it was stating fact. "And you know this fight is bigger than your fleet, bigger than your people." Dreth nodded slowly. "If what we saw today was just the beginning, the rest of the galaxy doesn't stand a chance without you." Nathan's gaze lingered on him for a moment. Then he gave a short, approving nod. "Then you understand why we can't stay here." Syra glanced up. "Leave? After all that?" Nathan's eyes hardened. The Hollow won't attack the same place twice so soon. They'll spread out, searching for weak points, testing isolated systems. We can't wait for them to pick the next target. We have to take the fight to them. From the far side of the bridge, one of Nathan's officers reported. "Hull repairs underway, engines stable, all weapons at combat readiness." Nathan acknowledged with a brief nod, then looked back at Dreth. "We'll need ally ships willing to fight, crews willing to learn our tactics. And when the Hollow return in force, we meet them with a united wall, not scattered defenses." Dreth exchanged a glance with Syra, then straightened. "The Xylarian Council will hear of this. I'll make sure they understand what's at stake." Nathan stepped closer, his presence almost heavier than the words he spoke. "Don't waste time convincing them with talk. Show them the footage. Show them the faces of the Hollow. Let them feel the truth for themselves." On the outer screens, the planet below turned slowly in the light of its star. The ruins of the human city still cloaked in storms. Nathan's gaze lingered on it for a moment. There was no warmth in his eyes, only a kind of quiet respect, as if acknowledging a grave where something precious had been buried. The Sentinels' engines began to rise in pitch, a deep, steady hum that vibrated through the deck plating. Nathan's voice carried over the bridge. "Set course for the edge of the distortion fields. Engage stealth protocols once we're clear of the planet's pull." His crew moved instantly, the warship shifting its massive bulk toward the darkness between stars. As the view of the ruined world began to shrink, Dreth realized this was not the end of something. Need was the opening move of a campaign that would stretch far beyond this system. Nathan seemed to read the thought in his eyes. "This was a test," he said quietly. "Next time, it will be war."